Hello again, welcome back to the channel. On this episode we're going to be looking at how to service your winch. Most experts will tell you to service your winch at least every 12 months depending on how hard you're using it. Obviously if you're going off-road every weekend, if you're winching off it, if you're doing crazy stuff all the time, maybe every 6 months. Even at a minimum, just unspooling the winch line and just running it out and back a few times just to keep everything lubricated. I've done none of those things. I've had the winch on the car now for coming up to 2 years. It's sat on the front of the car, it's gone through water crossings, mud, sand, dust, everything you kind of throw at it, and it's still performing really well. Very happy with this winch. This is just a King's Dominator X winch, 12,000 pound. It's excellent for the money. I can't find anything I would fault with it. Maybe the actual winch hook that's supplied, but apart from that, I'm pretty happy with it. So we're going to be pulling this apart. We're going to be cleaning out all the old grease. We're going to be looking for any water damage, any seal damage, that sort of stuff. We're going to take all the line off the drum. We're going to wash that. We're going to soak it in some hot soapy water for a little while and let it dry. And then we're going to reassemble it all so that it's ready to go for the next 12 months or 24 months, depending on when I remember to service it again. So let's get stuck into it. Now the first thing you're going to want to do is obviously split the winch up. So you're going to have the motor side, you're going to have the gearbox side, and then you're going to have your drum in the center. It's all held together by these braces that go across it. So depending on what winch you have, you'll need different tools to get that apart. For me, it's a couple of Allen keys. Now I didn't want to show you pulling the winch out of the car because it's kind of a personal thing, I guess, case by case, because depending on what car you have, what winch you have, and what bull bar you have, it will obviously be a different process. There's no point showing you how I do it. If you're interested in seeing how this winch went in, check out my, it was my second video on the channel, how to install a 4x4 winch, which I think was uploaded, close to 2 years ago. So have a check of that if you're interested in how they go in, and that will give you an idea of how they all come out. Some other exciting news that's coming up is at this moment, at this time of filming, I have 1,998 subscribers. I'm going to be constantly checking that as I'm making this video and seeing if I can crack the 2,000. If I do, we're going to throw a bit of a celebration, and we are also going to make an announcement about something new coming to the channel that you guys can get involved with as well, so stay tuned, and if you can, hit that subscribe button. So I'll just take this side off first. Again, everything's kind of on a spline, so try to be gentle when you're pulling things apart. So there's our gearbox side. And then this should slide out of the motor, and there's everything there. So what I might do first is I'm going to take all this rope off the spool, off the drum, and then I'm going to go soak that in some hot soapy water and leave that for a little while to sink in, pull all this mud out of the line. You wouldn't believe it. While I was soaking the winch rope, we cracked 2,000 subscribers. We're at 2001 at this stage. I did miss the 2000, which I was kind of annoyed about, but hey, we're there. Thanks guys. Look, thank you very much for subscribing. I'm sure by the time this video comes out, I'll have already gone past 2005 probably. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for subscribing, and thank you for sharing it with your mates who may or may not be interested in some of the silly stuff I get up to. So thanks to all you out there, and you watching, you as well. Thank you very much. So we're going to start with the actual gearbox of the winch. So if you stand on end here, you can see there's a bunch of Allen key bolts go around here. I'm just going to undo all of those, put them to the side, and then we can take this top plate off. All right, that's number 10 out. So sometimes these might get a bit tight, so you got to hit them with a hammer to kind of break a seal. Luckily this comes off nice and easy. But where this sits in the car, up the top here, and this is down the bottom, up the top still nice and red. There's a little bit of thick grease on there. Down the bottom it's quite brown, which would probably indicate that water would probably get in there and actually sit there, and it looks like it's been there a while. So luckily we're going to be cleaning all that up. So planetary gear. Again, looks like there's a bit of dirt that's gotten in here. Looks a bit yucky. So inner one as well. Yeah, it does. Ring off. So all of this, different people have different methods. I've seen people using degreaser or even like a high pressure hose and a bit of degreaser. I'm just going to soak them in petrol, give them a few hours sitting there soaking in a bucket. hopefully should break down a lot of that grease and then allow me to get it out a lot easier. There are different solvents you can use for grease and for oils, that sort of stuff. Obviously you can just get big containers of degreaser. Petrol also works really well, or kerosene if you have it. So I mean, petrol is really cheap at the moment, so I've just got a little jerry can of petrol. Gonna let all this soak in some petrol now and come back to it in an hour or so. Okay. So the motor is all kind of held in by the two ends. The way to take it apart is you're going to have there's 4 studs up here using Allen keys, so we're just going to undo them. Alright, with those 4 out of the way, we'll take that end cap off. It's got a little O-ring in here. Doesn't seem to do much, looks pretty worn. There's a little bit of corrosion on this inside surface here, but none further in, so that little O-ring is obviously doing its job, which is nice to know. Got our motor in here. Again, that end looks really clean. I'm very happy with that. So I'm actually going to leave the motor as it is. That bearing is still really nice. There's no cross movement or anything in it. So I'm pretty happy with all that. Let's have a look at this side. So in here there's some more Allen keys on the bottom where the seal is. Just under here. There's 4 of them, so I'm just going to undo them now.
1 hour later.
So we got that apart with some difficulty. I actually had to hammer in a slightly larger Allen key bit into the spots because it was just stripping the metal because they were in there so tight. So sometimes hammering that in just has to be like, a mil or half a mil bigger in size. Getting that in spot, giving it a good hammer to get it to lock in, and then you can reef on it a bit harder. If that fails, then you're probably going to have to drill out the actual bolt, but luckily I didn't have to resort to that. So now you can pull that out. The actual motor itself still spins really nice. There's no I don't feel any notches in there. I might just clean up this copper surface on here just because it's got a little bit of wear mark. And this looks like it needs a little bit of lube on it. But apart from that, the motor's in really good condition. So we're just going to clean it up and get to putting it back together. I'm also just using the emery paper on any of the mating surfaces that I can find. So there might be a bit of corrosion on there. I'm just going to rub that off with the emery paper. And that way when they go back together, I've got 2 flat metal surfaces and no corrosion in the middle, which could warp those 2 surfaces and lead to leaking. So now that I'm happy with all that, I'm going to start putting it all back together. These don't have any locating dowels. I didn't realize that until I pulled it apart. I thought it might do. Some other winches do have locating dowels for how it all goes back together. This can only go back one way. So you'll have these spring-loaded brushes for the motor. They'll sit over the top there, so it has to go like that. And then you just have to figure out what orientation it is because you've got 4 bolt holes and 4 bolts. So obviously you can go, kind of every 90 degrees. For me, that side is the mounting side. It's going to sit like that on my bull bar. So I need my contacts to be like this. So it's going to go that way. So yeah, just have a bit of a think about it before you put it back together. It will save you a headache down the track of having to redo everything. This little O-ring I'm just going to put back on there. I've got a little bit of copper grease I'm just going to put on this mating surface, which should help to keep the water out, but also make it easier next time I want to pull it apart like that. So I'm going to put this one on. Again, I need to hold these out of the way. Let's go over this thing. All right. Cool. So what I did there is I just was holding 2 at once and then using something to pry one side over, and you could slowly lower it down onto that bush because the bearing on top is actually a little bit narrower. So even if you get it over the bearing, you have to then do it again to get onto the actual brushes. I think that's the correct word. Right, there's going to be another extra seal that goes over the top there that's just sitting in the bucket and soaking. Put this end cap back on. There's also a funny looking kind of squashed looking weird washer thing that actually sits inside this back cover and over the top of the bearing. I imagine that's to keep the bearing nice and square. So I'm just going to make sure I pop that in there. And again, I'm just going to put a little bit of grease on that mating surface and then put it all back together. And there we have it, that's our winch motor back together. So all I have to do now is, once it's all clean, I can put the seal back on the top surface, and then I'm going to run a little bit of grease around on these rubber surfaces. Now with our drum, there's not too much you can really do with this one. I'm going to give it a good clean down, so I'm just going to use some degreaser, get it to soak into all that grease on there. I can see a bit of dirty grease, that kind of brown, yucky looking grease on the shaft and also on the actual surfaces. So I'm going to make sure I clean all that off as well. Now, what grease should you run in your winch? I did a bit of research on this and couldn't find anything really conclusive. The only real strong opinion I could find was to use a lithium-based grease. So what I've got is I'm using this, which is Inox high temperature, extreme pressure, premium grade, multi-purpose grease. The good thing is it's got this red kind of pasty color, which is similar to what came in the winch, so it can't be that bad. Also, being a different color from black will also help me to be able to see if there's any leaks or if grease is like flinging out of any surfaces. Now, you don't want to be putting too much grease on anything that's going to be covered up as well, because in high temperatures, grease is going to expand. If it's only got rubber seals or something, then eventually it's going to force against those seals and either break the seals or just burst past them. So just be kind of sparing with your grease. There's no need to go overboard and absolutely cover it. If it's going to be something that's going to be submerged in grease, or it's like constantly doing stuff, then yeah, probably a good idea to go all out and fill it right up. But for now, I'm just going to put this on sparingly. Good to go. So we can put this back on. Line that back up somehow. Boom. And then that's all ready to go. So now we've just got our gearbox side to go. Now everything's been cleaned up, we can start looking at reassembling everything. Something I didn't even realize is this outer ring on here actually comes out, which is pretty cool. So yeah, managed to get that out. There was a fair bit of corrosion in there. Wasn't too happy to see it. So obviously the amount of grease that was in there previously was not enough, or it should have just been changed more often. Anyway, there was a few little bits and pieces of corrosion. You can see some on like these gears. It's just surface stuff. I did have to scrape some other stuff off, which was actually inhibiting two of these gears from spinning. So that would have been why it was a little bit hard to like free spool sometimes. So anyway, but that's all cleaned up. Happy with it, how it is at the moment. Once we cover it with some new grease, it'll stop that from happening again. So now we should get on to reassembling it all. Now the way this all goes back together is pretty easy. It's very hard for you to kind of get it the wrong way up. But essentially the first thing that's going to go in is your smallest piece. You'll see there's a spot right in the center, right down the bottom where that sits into. And then you're going to have, that will go over the top of that, that will go over the top of that, and then that will go over the top of that. And then it'll, you kind of build it all as as we're going along. I'm going to be trying to push as much grease as I can into each of these gears. And also keeping some on the outside as well, just to help with keeping it all moving. So that's the plan, and let's get into it. Get it to sit, a little bit on the splines. I know a lot of people wear gloves for this sort of thing, but it's just grease, it's not that hard to wash off. So let's grease him up, getting a little bit on the inside there, and then we'll put him in place. Like so. Just trying to get it like right in, so where the bearings of these gears are. And then we'll look at putting this in, just to try and spread that a bit more. And then we'll sit that in there. Again, as you put it in, you may need to actually move the rollers individually to get it to like sit in the grooves. And that's all in there nicely now. It's a tight fit. But that's now sitting in there, and that can rotate. Nice. All right, get this one in. All right, that's sitting. So we're going to look at putting this back together now. Now there was this gasket that came with it. It's just a rubber one. It's kind of pressed in there. Again, that'll just sit over the top. Grease is a good thing for keeping water out, because it is actually a physical and chemical barrier for moisture ingress. So anywhere that two seals meet, it's always a good idea to put a little bit of grease on there. So I just found it a bit easier to push all the bolts through the actual rubber gasket first, just to get it all to line up, because the gasket's a little bit larger in diameter than the hole is. So we'll get that to sit like so. That gearbox is now nice and clean, it's got some fresh grease in it. Alright, so what I've done here is I've just kind of jerry-rigged up a bit of a circuit to check that everything's working. So we've got our negative going straight to the negative terminal, the black terminal on the winch. Again, this will depend on what sort of winch you have, like the colours and the layout of all these terminals. But once you kind of have a look at your wiring diagram, you should be able to figure it out pretty easy. So essentially you've got your positive and negative, so you'll have your red and your black. They'll obviously be connected up to a power source. And then these two terminals will determine the polarity of the motor. So this isn't, I mean, it would be safer to do it with like jumper leads, but all we're looking to do is literally turn the motor over. We're not putting any load on the winch. These cables I think are only rated to about 15 amp. So we just want it to just turn over that motor and just make sure that the gearbox and everything is working fine. So at the moment, it's in free spool, because I can turn this quite easy in either direction. So what I can do is engage the clutch. Now I can only turn it in one direction. So we're going to engage this. So that's now winching inwards. Inwards? I think it's winching in. So I'm happy with how that winch is sitting on now. I'm happy that the motor is working fine and that the gearbox is running. It seems to be making a bit less noise now that it's running as well. So now I'm keen with that. We're going to actually start putting the winch rope back on. Okay, now to put this winch rope back on, we obviously have to spool it the same way that it's going to be pulling the winch rope. Luckily enough, this has got a little sticker on the top here saying that's the way it needs to be spooled. You can also do it by when the winch is on the car. So when this surface is against the bull bar, like that, the winch rope should be going underneath when you're pulling it in to allow it to pull up and over like that. On this drum, it's got a little threaded hole in the side. Basically, you have like a screw that goes through there and then holds it on. This screw is pretty dodgy. It's very short. It looks like it's made of pretty shitty stuff. Also, it's got a Phillips head on it, which I hate. So I'm going to be replacing that with a short 10mm bolt. So I'm going to have that ready to go. So that goes over the threaded hole. I've got my, where are we? Got my 10mm bolt. I've got a washer on the top there as well. What I'm also going to do is put a little bit of thread locker on there as well, because I noticed when I took it off the drum, it was already loose. And it was like kind of kinked to one side. So I'm going to try to prevent that from happening a second time. So for respooling this winch, what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw it back on the car. Once it's all mounted up and I've got all the wiring there, I've got two big batteries I can use to actually draw current for the winch. I don't have to worry about short circuiting and sending sparks everywhere. So I'm going to respool the line back on the car, because I think that's going to be the safest way to do it. Alright, so we've got the winch all mounted back up into the bull bar. It's all wired and ready to go. A little tip I will pass on is if you're putting those connections back on, what I did notice when I took the winch off was there's a little bit of corrosion on the terminals. So I've cleaned them all back, made sure everything's all good to go. And then when I put it all back on, I've actually used a little bit of dielectric grease. This you can buy from most auto shops. And it allows that electrical conductivity, but it keeps out water and dirt and all the rest of it. So really good stuff if you get your hands on it. So I've just put that underneath the rubber boots and also on the edges of the boots as well, so that water can't get in there. So now it's all wired up, ready to go. I can put a little bit of backwards tension on this winch, so that when I'm spooling it on, it's going to go on nice and tight. I want this black sheath to stay as long as possible. I don't want it to bunch up on the actual drum. So I'm going to be pulling back on that, going to be winching in, and then looking over the top of my bull bar and seeing as it's going in, so I can direct it so that it stays nice and neat on the drum. So the last thing you need to do is connect your winch hook back up to the actual line. So I've painted mine red because red goes faster, and that way I can go faster because I'm red. And then you have your little pin will go through as well, so put that through. So it's just got a split pin that holds it all in place. So I hope that's given you a bit of confidence to go out and service your winch ready for winter, if this isolation thing finally lifts. And yeah, get your winch ready to go. You might be surprised what you find in there. So pull it apart, give it a good clean, re-grease it, and then re-spool your line. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end, guys. I know it was a long video, but there's a lot of information in there. So if you're looking to do this job yourself, have a watch through and pick up any little tips and tricks. To celebrate cracking the 2,000 subscribers, I've got some stickers for you all. They are weatherproof vinyl, so they'll go on the outside of the car just fine and handle any rain or dirt or whatever you can throw at them. Head over to my Instagram page if you want to see the details of how you can get your hands on these. I can post these wherever you are, as long as you're not in a weird country where I can't send stuff to. And yeah, anything you can do to support the channel. So especially in these uncertain times, your contributions will really help to keep this channel afloat, help me to do more projects, and hopefully provide more content for you guys, which I definitely enjoy making and I hope you enjoy watching. So yeah, head over to my Instagram page, have a look at the post about the stickers, and learn how you can also help to support the channel. So thanks guys, catch you next time.